Hello and welcome to Standup Historian. I hope you are enjoying this beautiful spring that we have in spite of wars and rumors of wars and rising cost of living and all the minor and major problems that we have wherever we live these days on this beautiful planet of ours. My name is Kurosh, and I bring this podcast to you from Seattle, Washington, which is still cold, and we have not seen much of spring yet. I spent some time researching and studying different resources to create a content for this episode. And this is continuation of other past episodes that I had about Aryosophy, occultism, especially in Third Reich, and ideas of superior race. In this episode, I will talk to you about the efforts that was undertaken by a lot of philosophers and thinkers of their times to find out where was the lost Aryan homeland and where they have come from. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As usual, I would like to invite you to visit my website. There you can see my other material, writings, and other episodes of my podcast, as well as opportunity to contact me, leave your comments. Okay. Let's start without any further ado and see if we can figure out where is the lost Aryan homeland. Die verlorene arische Heimat, the lost homeland of Aryans. سرزمین گمشده آریایی ها. The idea of a fantastic and mysterious homeland of the Aryan people lying hidden somewhere in the far northern latitudes, in other words, North Pole, had a rich provenance not only in the tradition of Western occultism, but also in the burgeoning science of anthropology. Until the Enlightenment, of course, biblical tradition had been assumed to be the ultimate authority of the origin and history of humanity. The origin being Mount Ararat, on which Noah's Ark landed after the deluge or the flood, is supposedly where we started, humans started to spread across the planet and end up where we are today. This idea made sense even to those scientists of enlightenment who rejected biblical authority, since obviously mountainous regions such as Ararat in current-day Turkey would have provided the only possible protection against natural disasters such as prehistoric flood. And it did make sense to them that if there was a worldwide flood and the planet was covered in water, such a place as Mount Ararat would be a logical place for an ark to land. German romantics were greatly attracted to Oriental philosophy and mysticism. In particular, the Zend Avesta, the sacred text of ancient Persians. And in Zend Avesta, basically what we see is this. I'm going to read this passage for you. This is from a book called The Saga of the Aryan Race. I'm reading this to you so you understand how these German philosophers, after looking for a replacement or an alternative to the Judeo-Christian story of deluge and origin or homeland of people, they were trying to find an answer, and they found it in Zend Avesta. And the story goes like this. The story begins 20,000 years ago, in an age shrouded in the mystery of time. At this time, the world was almost uninhabited, except for a few savage tribes in Africa and Asia. The earth lay barren. It was the breeding place of dangerous animals and untamed jungle lands and deserts where no human could survive. And yet, amazingly, there was one place on earth that was peopled, the very top of the world. The North Arctic region was populated by a race of people who proudly called themselves the Aryans. By this, they meant simply the pure and the noble ones. They formed the first civilized nation in the history of the world. The Arctic region in those days was not an icy and cold as it is now. It was warmer, and the Aryans lived there very comfortably. The Aryans called their land Aryanam Vaijo, which meant the homeland of Aryans. So, this paragraph was from the Saga of the Aryan race, which tells the story of change in climate. North Pole is green and warm, and the Aryan race lived there, and they proudly called themselves Aryans. Further through the book, it talks about their appearance, even their skin color and differences between them and other savages, which they call it savages, nations that lived farther south on the planet. A disaster happens, and these Aryans end up leaving their homeland, traveling south towards a promised land, which I'll take you there later in this podcast. So this is the story that, like thinkers of the caliber of Goethe, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Richard Wagner, found in the Orient as a system of philosophy and historiography that allowed them to abandon the unsatisfactory worldview of Judeo-Christianity. So, in fact, they find these passages after they start studying Eastern philosophy and Eastern religions, especially Zoroastrian, which was the ancient religion in Persia. Hand in hand with this admiration for the Orient was a rediscovery of the German folk. The pre-Christian Teutonic tribes, whose descendants, the Goths, had brought about the final destruction of the decadent Roman Empire. The problem faced by the German Romantics was how to forge a historical connection between themselves and the Orient. They are in the West, and there is Orient, which they considered to be the cradle of humanity and the origin of the highest human ideals. The question was, where had those noble and gifted tribes come from? Were they too sons of Noah? Or dared one sunder them from the biblical genealogy? The time was ripe to do so. The French had set the precedent of contempt for the Hebrew scriptures as a source of accurate information. They challenged Bible as a source of accurate and reliable source of information. The British School of Calcutta, with their Asiatic researchers, had revealed another world. They spent many decades in India, and they got in touch with Hindus and other ancient religions in that region. And they saw surely more learned and to many minds philosophically and morally superior to that of the Moses. If the Germans could link their origins to India, then they would be forever free from their Semitic and Mediterranean bondage. And that was their entire goal and their dream to connect it. In previous episode of Standup Historian, when we were talking about Aryosophy, I told you that Lantz went as far as saying that Hebrew was originally written in German. Of course, in order to establish and strengthen the link between Germans and the Orient, Hebrew had to be abandoned as the original language of humanity. Hebrew, which is a form of Aramaic and Sumerian, is assumed to be the original language, or at least closest to the original language. We cannot forget about Arabic and to some extent Persian. I'll get to that language in a little bit. So they needed to replace Hebrew with another language, which was the language of classical Hinduism, and that is Sanskrit. So what we see so far is the folkish movement of Germany started looking into the East. They found new source of wisdom which surpassed everything they have been taught by the Judeo-Christian Bible and stories in the Bible and everything else. In the story of Gilgamesh, you remember, if you go back and listen to that episode of Standup Historian, one of the issues that arose from the story of Gilgamesh and the translation of Gilgamesh was that the story of flood was in Gilgamesh, and it's much older than Bible. So now the question for these thinkers and philosophers was, how can we connect East with the West and find our roots in the East? Because why we are here if everything is started there? So that we need to connect these two. And language is always the best connection. It provides the best connection. And that's where you see the Indo-European languages such as Sanskrit and also Persian, also known as Farsi. So going back to the story of Zend Avesta and the creation of humanity and beginning of Aryan race, I told you about where they lived according to Zend Avesta, which is the top of the world in North Pole. Now, let's see what happened when they moved. One problem that I want to point out is most of these thinkers looked into India to find their answer. And they were completely missing the most important element in terms of geography and land, and that was Persia, or today's Iran. Persia was also including Tajikistan and many other countries surrounding today's Iran, or close, not necessarily next door neighbors, but extended neighbors. That includes Afghanistan and Pakistan. let's see what the Zend Avesta says about this Aryan land and how they migrated from the North Pole southward, and where did they end up being. The historian Zend Avesta continues by introducing a promised land, and the promised land is called Iran. Yes, Iran was the promised land for these Aryans, that they left their homeland, and according to Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda, the wise creator, he told them, I will take you to a land where you can establish your lives again and bring the knowledge and civilization that you have with you to this area. And that land is called Iran. So once they get to Iran, the story continues like this. The Aryans settled in Iran, now heard of their brethren who had not taken the same route they had, but had branched off to the west, to the east, and to the southeast. The Aryans had settled in another Ahura-created land, where mighty rivers flowed and tall, snowy peaks clung to the sky. This was the land of Aryavat, which was to be known after thousands of years as Afghanistan, Kashmir, and Pakistan, and the upper reaches of North India. The fine Aryan cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were the places where the Ahura-worshipping Aryans lived and thrived for thousands of years. And Ahura Mazda and his glorious creations, such as fire, were worshipped devotedly. Aryans also heard of other Aryan tribes who settled in present-day Russia, while others traveled across the continent to spread like a great ocean into Europe, fighting and conquering the barbarians wherever they went. The Aryans settled in the present-day countries of Europe: Germany, Greece, France, Italy, Spain, England, Ireland, and Scandinavian countries. The European Celts, Greeks, the Italians, the Slavs, Lithuanians, Germans, Anglo-Saxons, Irish, and Scandinavian were but offshoots of this mighty race. So, just by following this story, you see that in beliefs and teachings of Zoroastrianism, everything is started in North Pole. There's this race, they live there, the only civilized race that existed at the time. They started their migration southward, and in another book, which I'm going to read a few passages from there for you, it tells us what happened and why they left their homeland and how that homeland was disappeared. The book is called the Bach Saga. And in this book also, there are some Nord mythology and stories of ancient Nordic nations about what happened when the great Aryan race left their homeland. And the story starts like this. At the time when this story begins, the Earth's axis was perpendicular to the sun. The Earth's axis is the imaginary line through the North Pole and the South Pole, around which the Earth rotates. One rotation is equal to what we know as a day. In this rotation, Wherever we are on our polar planet, and on our planet, half the time we face towards the sun, and the other half we face away from it. This is called day and night. The Earth not only rotates around its own axis, but also around the sun. One rotation is called a year. The Earth's axis is tilted 23.4 degrees. And this is the key in this Nordic mythology. During the winter time, North Pole is facing away from the sun and therefore gets less daylight. At the same time, the South Pole is pointed towards the sun and enjoys summer. Now, let's return to the beginning, when the Earth's axis was perpendicular to the sun. This means that there was no summer and no winter, since the North and South Poles were facing neither towards nor away from the sun. The only way of knowing what time of year it was to look up at the stars in the sky. The Earth's axis was perpendicular to its orbit around the sun and turned around its axis once a day, every 24 hours. It got light and dark. This was the same everywhere except the North and South Poles. Imagine standing exactly on top of the North Pole, the Earth's axis perpendicular to the orbit around the sun. The sun's position would be close to the horizon. As the Earth's turned to the left, it would seem as if the sun was moving to the right along the horizon, never rising or setting. It would always move around you in a ring. If you were to place a stick in the ground, the sun would cast a shadow that would move clockwise. One full turn of the shadow would mark the passing of one day. Somewhere in our story, the Earth's axis shifted and the location of the North Pole changed to where it is now. At the beginning of our story, however, the exact North Pole is located on the top of the planet, on a small island in front of what is now Helsinki in Finland. The name of the island is Odennes, the island of Odin, and it is situated in the province of Odenma. In Finnish, Udunema. It continues by this poem. Odin is a ring. Odin is everything. Odin has always been, and Odin will always be. So the land surrounding the exact North Pole, where the sun never sets, it's called Odenma. Odenma is the land of the sun, the land of Aryans. The time when our story begins is the time of paradise. In roots, it is called Paradisit. Paradise time is everything you would expect from such an idyllic concept. It suggests a perfect world with a balmy subtropical climate all year round and food in abundance. Odenma, where the sun never rises nor sets, is therefore one big paradise, the Garden of Odin. Sounds familiar, right? Garden of Eden. The perfect place for the story of mankind to start unraveling. And this book continues. It is a fascinating book. I strongly recommend you take a look at it, and if you like to buy it, you can order it on Amazon. The book again is called The Bach Saga and Introduction. So the point I'm trying to make is, in ancient sacred religion of Zoroastrianism and their sacred book, Zend Avesta, we see that people living on the North Pole, which at the time was like a paradise. In Nordic mythology, also there is Odin, which is very close to the name Eden, or in Arabic, Aden, which is paradise, birthplace of humanity. In both mythologies, through some kind of upheaval, some astronomical event causes the earth to lose its perpendicular axis and rotates around the sun with that tilt angle of 23.4 degrees. The result is cold temperatures, and the whole area becomes uninhabitable. And the Great Migration starts, and they move to warmer places southwards. In Zoroastrianism, the land that was promised to these people, to Aryans, was Iran. One more piece of information that could help you here is the name of country Iran. It has always been called Iran, but in the West mostly as Persia or Persian Empire, which in Farsi language is called Pars. And Pars is a province in Iran where you can see the kingdom of, or the Achaemenid dynasty started in Pars. That's why it's called Persian Empire. And the name was changed. Throughout the history, the name changed from Iran to Pars or Persia or Persian Empire. And finally, the late King Reza of Pahlavi dynasty, he officially changed the name from Persia or Pars to Iran. And he did it in 1930s. And the reason for that was to bring the Iranian people back to their origins, back to their beliefs that this is the original land of Aryans. And Iran simply means Homeland of Aryans. I'll get to the stories that are about the relationships between the King Reza of Iran, not the last king of the Pahlavi dynasty, but the first one, the father, and his relationship with Germans and how much Germans built and did in Iran during the rule of Hitler and National Socialist Party in Germany. We'll get to those stories. But I just wanted to show you that these philosophers, they were looking for a connection between West and East, and the connection was and always has been in Iran. And they went southward more towards India to look for the roots of that. And they obviously exposed, in fact, to Hinduism, beliefs of Tibet, and there was a lot of mysticism, esoterics, and a lot of Oriental philosophies that as you go south from Iran, you see that the spread of the same philosophy, the same beliefs that Aryans brought with them initially to Iran and then spread it out. So in the desire to rediscover the ultimate mythical and cultural roots of the master race, the proponents of Aryanism turned away from the heat of the biblical Mesopotamian Eden. I just read to you the Odin. And looked instead to the cool and pristine vastness of the far north, or North Pole. The 18th century Jean Sylvain Bailey had already done much of the groundwork for a radical reinterpretation of humanity's origin with his highly original combination of Eastern mysticism and astronomy. According to Bailey, the ancient cultures of Egypt and Chaldea and India were actually the heirs of a far older body of knowledge, possessed in the distant past by a long-lost superior culture living in the antediluvian north. So when they talk about Chaldea, I would assume they include Babylon, Persia, and Mesopotamia, because it's started there. Bailey believed that it was this ancient culture that existed and originated in North Pole. It was this ancient culture that invented the zodiac in around 4600 BC. Members of this civilization had then moved from Northern Asia to India, which again we see it in Zend Avesta. It tells us that one group of Aryans, they reached Iran, they settled, and others continued going southward towards India, of course. For Bailey, this assertion was supported by the similarities of certain legends in later cultures, living far from each other. For example, the legend of Phoenix, which is found in Persia, Egypt, and Scandinavian Eddas. Bailey equated the details of Phoenix's death and rebirth with the annual disappearance of the sun for 65 days at 71 degrees north latitude, darkness of winter. He went on to compare the phoenix with the Roman god Janus, or Janus, the god of time, who is represented with the number 300 in his right hand, and the number 65 in his left hand, corresponding, of course, with the 300 days of daylight and 65 days of darkness each year in the far northern latitudes as we go north, as we move north. 365 days. Bailey thus concluded that Janus was actually a northern god who had moved south with the original worshippers in the distant past. In support of his theory, Bailey also cited the legend of Adonis, who was required by Jupiter to spend 1/3 of each year on Mount Olympus, 1/3 with Venus, and 1/3 in Hades with Persephone. Bailey connected this legend with conditions in the geographical area at 79 degree north latitude, where the sun disappears for 4 months, or 1/3 of the year. To Bailey, this strongly suggested the preservation of the ancient knowledge of Nordic civilization, which had been encoded in numerous legends passed down to subsequent cultures. These ideas corresponded somewhat with the work of one Comte de Buffon, who had concluded in 1749 that the earth had formed much earlier than Christian date, which is around 4000 BC. The idea of polar homeland for humanity was also elaborately developed by the Indian Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who wrote an epic work called The Arctic Home in the Vedas. You have to remember that when Indians start writing, they are the closest to this history. They have access to scriptures written in Sanskrit, to scriptures which goes back thousands of years to the origins, and they share this history and these stories with Persians and Zoroastrian and Zend Avesta. So it shouldn't be any surprise that Bal Gangadhar Tilak called his work The Arctic Home in the Vedas. While in prison, he was in prison in 1897 for publishing anti-British material in his newspaper. That's where he wrote. And his new newspaper was the Kaysan. Published in 1903, Tilak's book concentrates on the age and original location of the Indian Vedic civilization, from its origin in the Arctic around 10,000 BC. So you see how everything comes together. You have Zend Avesta, you have Nordic mythology, you have all these calculations of number of days, and then we have Tilak's and his studies and his work to show that the Indian Vedic civilization was formed 10,000 BC. Though its destruction in the last ice age, the migration to northern Europe and Asia in around 8,000 to 5,000 BC, and the composition of the Vedic hymns, the loss of the Arctic traditions around 3,000 to 1400 BC, to the pre-Buddhistic period in 1400 to 500 BC. Tilak's reading of the ancient Vedic texts supported his assertion of a prehistoric homeland, which is mentioned in Avesta, in the far north, describing as they did a realm inhabited by the gods where the sun rose and fell once a year. It should be noted that the Vedic hymns are full of images that make no sense in the context of a daily sunrise, such as the 30 dawn sisters circling like a wheel, and the dawn of many days preceding the rising of the sun. If, however, they are applied to the pole, they fall perfectly into place. The light of the sun circling beneath the horizon would be visible for at least 30 days before its annual rising. And again, if you go back when I was reading from the Nordic legends, it explains how the sunrise and sunset didn't exist at the time. Once again, one can imagine the sense of anticipation felt by inhabitants as the wheeling light became ever brighter and the long winter's nights came to an end. The date for the first appearance of Aryans in the polar regions at 25,000 BC was during the interglacial age. The Aryans were forced to leave their homeland as the environment grew steadily colder and more hostile. The advent of the ice age that scattered the Aryans from their pleasant homeland was just one of a number of global catastrophes that proved the downfall of at least 3 other ancient civilizations: Atlantis, Lemuria, and the Gobi Desert. From the point the Aryan tradition influenced the great civilizations of Egypt, Sumer, and Babylon. Before I finish this episode, and just to recap everything, we've been looking at attempts by many philosophers, many thinkers from both East and West, mostly from the West and mostly among German folkish movement, and to connect West and the roots into East, and in fact cut through the information and domination of biblical stories and history told according or based on Bible, and find their roots in the East. And in search of that, we found that a homeland for Aryans has been in the North Pole. There are different variations of this story, but what we know is that from Zend Avesta and some many other Nordic stories that it was in the North Pole. So I am going to read one more paragraph from this story for you, from Zend Avesta, before I close this episode. because it talks about the Ice Age and coming of a cold winter. This scripture talks about a time when there was a king called King Jamshid, and he writes to his subjects to let them know what is about to happen. I, King Jamshid, ruler of the Aryan race, have thus been favored by Lord Ahura Mazda. But my dear subjects, troubled times loom ahead menacingly for the Aryan race. The great Ahura Mazda, the Lord of the Aryans, has told me thus: O King, evil times will strike upon the Aryan race in the form of cruel winter. Evil will come, a snow will fall, lakes will freeze, crops will die, the homeland of the Aryans, Aryanam Vejo, will become totally cold and inhospitable. I, who am Ahura Mazda, your God and the God of the whole world, wish to warn you of the coming events. It is my wish that the Aryan race and the Aryan religion be not extinguished. Therefore, you should take the necessary steps. So informing me, Ahura Mazda has obliged all of us. He has made it possible for us to prepare for the great journey that our race should undertake. So prepare, my dear Aryan subjects. We must leave our beloved homes and move southward. We must uproot our houses and our hearts and move along. Remember, we do it for the welfare of our children, for the future of Aryan race. We do it so that the Aryan Mazdayasni religion will not die out. It is for the future that we must leave our ancient homeland and move. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. And God bless you all.